One.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Let's look into the night sky, stare into the night sky, and celebrate an anniversary today with Dylan Storey from Dylan Storey's Astronomy, and of course Stardom Observatory as well. And making it sound like you've got a a complex there with all this staff and people staring into the night sky. Yeah,
you make me sound like I'm sponsored by myself.
That's Dylan Storey from Dylan Storey's Astronomy.
No, thanks kindly to Stardom Observatory in One Tree Hill.
Yeah, indeed, in Auckland City. And of course, they are also celebrating this anniversary today, the anniversary of the first man in space. How many years has it been?
50 years on April the 12th. It's the, half centenary or whatever of human beings being able to go into space. So it was on April the 12th, 1961, that Yuri Gagarin, the Russian cosmonaut, jumped in his Vostok capsule and headed off, launched up into space and completed one lap of the Earth, and then landed, re-entered the atmosphere, activated his landing sequence, and eventually ejected and landed by parachute, and therefore completing the first orbit of the world.
What a legend. And crikey, the Americans were not happy about that.
Not happy. The Russians well ahead of them in the Cold War at the time, and of course the Russians had started out in 1957 by launching SPUTNIK, the first object to orbit the Earth, and it beeped, and as it went over, it was all around the world, people could pick up the beep, and it was kind of terrifying for those who perceived themselves as enemies of the Soviets, because they thought, what's that beeping? Is it spy cameras? Is it military arsenals? It turned out to be just a beep. But
just a dude in a capsule cruising around.
No, well, this is 4 years later, the first man up there.
Yeah,
and Yuri actually had very little control, if any, over the trajectory of the spacecraft. It was pretty much all set in motion when it was launched. He had a few controls. He could control this climate and everything, but he had a window. He could look out over the Earth and see the Earth. So it was more about being the first man in space than actually doing anything up there.
What a brave,
very famous.
Well, that's right, and what a brave soul. I mean, wouldn't you be petrified? Because you'd be thinking, oh, heck, okay, I made it up this far, it didn't explode on takeoff, and now there's a possibility I might burn up on re-entry.
Yeah, there's a lot that can go wrong, and I guess they were painfully aware of that. They'd sent a lot of dogs up before that, and the first few dogs didn't survive, but after that they were all right. So I think they were fairly confident to get back to Earth, but it still would have been incredibly dangerous.
And 50 years later, space travel is still very far from routine.
That's right. It's actually not that different to what Yuri did. I mean, we've got the International Space Station up there, and we've got basically since the Apollo missions, which were 30 years ago now, man hasn't been 40 years ago. Man hasn't been further than near Earth orbit. So that was the only time that man has been out of near Earth orbit.
Yeah.
And another sort of odd statistic is that the space shuttle is 30 years old, because they launched the first space shuttle, Columbia, on the anniversary of Yuri's flight into space, and that was 20 years after the initial one. So it's kind of funny to think of the space shuttles as being closer to the Cold War technology than it is to now.
Yeah. So we kind of hit a technological wall in some respects for actually getting man into space. I guess we've progressed with telescopes and satellites and probes and that kind of thing. But with man travel, it's really much the same.
It has, yeah. Astronomy's advanced huge leaps since then, with the advent of space telescopes and things like that, X-ray telescopes. But no, it's hit a wall, as you say. It's not insurmountable. It's just going to require a lot more resources to get men any further, get man back to the moon or out to Mars.
And of course, over that 50 years, we've been chucking all kinds of stuff into space and into orbit, and a lot of that stuff has now turned into space junk. And so there's a bit of a risk up there as well, isn't there?
Yeah, well, every time something gets sent up, basically bits fall off it as part of the launching process, but the spent rocket stages and things like that, So there's all this stuff that's just floating around, and eventually their orbits eventually degrade and come back into the atmosphere and burn up. But there's still a lot floating around up there. And when you get things like the rare case of satellites colliding, then they'll smash into millions of bits.
Yeah.
And each of those bits will take its own trajectory around the Earth, becoming a deadly piece of space junk itself. So it can really multiply this effect of space junk. And even though, I mean, this is 100 to 400 kilometers up, and that's a lot of space. So the chances of something small like a satellite, or even smaller like a grain of sand-sized piece broken off a satellite,
Yeah.
the chances of it hitting something are very rare.
Right.
But then the sheer number that are coming up there and the number of orbits they're doing means that sooner or later something's going to be a threat to the International Space Station and the astronauts on board. So there are organisations trying to track each piece of space debris. I mean, they can only track anything bigger than about a grapefruit.
Yeah.
But
well, am I right to say that the sun is entering an active phase at the moment, and then that can have some influence on the space junk?
Yeah, it does, because the sun, when it's in its active phase, it's releasing more ions which react with the atmosphere or something like that, and it causes the atmosphere to actually swell up a little bit. It becomes the atmosphere to become more electrically charged or something.
Yeah.
And the atmosphere physically moves up a little bit, so that means that all these objects lying in higher Earth orbit, they're subjected to more atmospheric drag, which means they're going to degrade and more likely to come down into the orbit where the space station is. So yeah, that can cause a bit of extra threat.
And there were a couple of close calls in the past week with the space station.
Yeah, I mean, they're tracking all this stuff, and they try and track it a few weeks in advance if it's going to likely to go anywhere near the space station, so they can warn the astronauts. In the worst case, they can actually take evasive maneuvers on the space station, but that's not like just turning around as it goes along. It takes about 2 or 3 days to actually change the direction of the space station.
Right.
Failing that, then what they do is that all the astronauts go into the lifeboat, which is the Soyuz Russian craft, which is permanently attached to the space station, which is their lifeboat in case anything goes wrong to get back to Earth. So if there's any threat, they'll go and hide in there, being the sort of minimal area for something to get hit, and that can always detach if there's any emergency. So yeah, there've been a couple of close calls in the last few weeks.
Interesting. And finally, there's a great, exciting show on this month at the Stardome.
Yes, well, there's always, all the time at 8 o'clock, there's the Sky Tonight show where a presenter takes you through the things in the night sky, kind of a visual astronomy-based show, explains the constellations and all sorts of facts about space. At 7 o'clock this month, there is a show called Grand Tour, where the presenter will take you literally flying through space. So with the planetarium software, we can leave Earth and go and visit all the planets, orbit them, visit the sun, go further out in the solar system and show labels of all the things out in space. And it's flown live by the presenter, so just talking about things as they go along.
They don't offer you a psychoactive drug at the door in order to complete this manoeuvre.
No, but I tell you what, you get some people coming in there with some suspiciously red-looking eyes at times.
I bet. So this sounds great. So someone's at the controls, and you're propelled through space.
Yeah, you're flying through space. I mean, flying through space does. You've got to realise it's not like you'd see on a sci-fi movie.
Right.
When you're flying at a few million kilometres per second through the solar system, you see absolutely no movement of the stars because they're so far away.
Yeah.
But you do see the movement as your attitude changes, as the orientation changes, and you see all the stars change position around you, and you can fly out. So that's a really cool show, and it's really cool for the presenters to present because you can make it up as you go along.
Yeah. Captain's log and all that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, that sounds really fun.
That's well worth checking out. Yeah, at 7 o'clock.
Cool. At the Auckland
every night except Monday and Tuesday.
Okay, the Auckland Stardome Observatory. Dylan Storey, thanks, and we'll chat to you next time.
Thanks, Wammo.
Dylan Storey there. Brilliant.